Hello, I think I'm live. I'm not really sure. If I am, could somebody have a look in the live chat and let me know? So sorry about any delay there. We're going to have a discussion this evening. Excuse me. We're going to start by briefly discussing the events of very recently in France and potentially discuss some of the other major incidents that have happened in France as the result of Islamist attacks. And then, well, you'll see. Basically, we're going to extrapolate from that some stuff that's to do with Jesus, basically. You'll be surprised to know. So rather than last week's format, which was pretty structured and like, around in a circle, as it were, this time I think it's going to be more open, unless that doesn't work, and then we'll revert to one at a time, like in order. But my opening statement, I guess, would be that I'm pretty pleased at the recent declarations of the French Parliament in response to these atrocities and how they tie into freedom of speech, which is one of my, I believe in it strongly due to my time at Speaker's Corner and before. So yeah, my opening statement is that freedom of speech must be paramount. If we can't speak the truth, we can't preach Christ risen. And anti-Christ or unchristian or godless ideologies will seek to silence the truth and to censor, insults and dissent because they're insecure and they're not based in the truth. That's my assertion, and I'll open it up for anybody who wants to speak about France in general or the specific attacks.
Right, so I agree with what you say. I think many things that are uncomfortable to hear should still be, people should have the right to say them. This is not an uncommon phenomenon, right? There is a level of intolerance of expression that comes from certain cultures, especially from, in this case, the Islamic culture, the Islamic religion, that is just incompatible with the Western values that we have in this century. It hasn't always been like this. People have fought for it. People have died to have this freedom of expression. And now this this new culture, this new religion that is in the title, the religion of wokeness, this is what is, among many other things actually, but this is one of the elements that is threatening it, right? And the way it works is simply certain things shouldn't be said openly because they cause some distress to a certain group of people. They're taboo, you can't really say them out loud, and this is how things proceed without any interference. If there is a malicious force that is infiltrating society, will not hear about it because you can't speak about it, and things like this happen. When this infiltration is too advanced, then you get these reactions because these group of people cannot bear such words spoken out, such cartoons drawn about something that that belongs to their culture. The satire and irony does not belong to them. Now, all of this that the West has been through, all these ideological reforms, if you want, it doesn't belong to the Eastern world. It has been through a different set of ideological processes, but the West is different, and my stance is that Islamic religion and the society that it aims to create is not compatible with what they have in the West, and which is the result of this is obviously these attacks that we see.
Yeah. Anybody else want to open?
Yes, I would like to start by saying that the word Islamophobia is a completely made up word that makes no sense. If you look at what a phobia means, it's an irrational fear. And, it's not irrational not to want your head lopped off or be blown up just because, somebody doesn't have a sense of humor. And it was also coined by the Muslim Brotherhood, if I'm not mistaken. So, for your enemy to dictate what you can and cannot say and make up a nice sounding word, and for everybody to adopt it and saying like, no, if you have critique, you're Islamophobic. That's the same thing that happens with other ideologies. They make up this word to shame you with, so nobody takes you seriously, and that's just not a game I'm willing to play. And I think that's my opening.
Longshanks?
Can we, hi guys, can we just quickly define what wokeness actually is?
I can try.
Does anyone, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to get up just for my reference. So I'll start by saying that wokeness is in opposition, as it were, to being asleep to persecution of minorities. That's my understanding without getting up a dictionary definition, which I'm about to. So the idea of being awake to the persecution of minorities, intersectionality plays a big part in defining who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor. Okay, let's see. So this, so I'm going to choose the Cambridge Dictionary because it's the first thing I've got. I'm going to have to move my camera ever so slightly and agree to some cookies. It just says wokeness, a state of being aware, especially of social problems such as racism and inequality, i.e., like an example is wokeness encompasses the need to search for more knowledge, understanding and truth in order to challenge injustice. What I would say to that is it also allows for collective guilt, collective shame, collective victimhood, and it can incorporate people into it that historically haven't been a part of that victimhood, but just because of the colour of their skin or their gender, they're now, like it or not, a part of the oppressed, as it were. And systemic racism is also like, critical race theory is incorporated heavily. So, yeah.
So it's definitely something associated with left-wing politics, right?
Yes.
So it's identity politics, and it's relatively new. Did we want to connect it to historicity in any way, like say where it came from? Just a quick background, or?
So the theories basically grew out of Marxism and postmodernism, which generally don't go together, but they somehow coalesced. Intersectionality, like I said, is a big part. So women are traditionally seen as like victims of men, as it were, and then people of colour who happen to be women, and then maybe black women who have a certain sexuality, and then maybe if they have a disability. So each of so it's the same woman, but for each of those groups that she can be identified with, she basically gets points, as it were. She's more protected and more defended within the narrative. There's nothing wrong with, equality, but it also, like I said, allows for white privilege and white fragility and stuff like that, which is anti-Christian, as is racism.
So it's Marxism. It's basically the successor to the failed idea of like class struggle based on economics. This class struggle based on identity.
Instead of class, it's identity.
Yeah, and it's the oppression Olympics. Who can you define by narrower and narrower boxes until you've got the narrowest box of all, and they win something apparently. And it speaks to people who've grown up with participation trophies, like, hey, you're a winner just for trying, and then they enter real life, and it turns out the world doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. So, yeah, I think that's why it speaks to people with that kind of mindset, because they like to prevent people's feelings from being hurt, because that's how they were raised, and so they sign up wholesale for every label you can put on people as a special protected class, but also, you know, entire words like Islamophobia, right? Like you're Islamophobic if you don't want your head to be cut off. No, that's just being a realist.
I would say that
So
it grew out of liberalism, and it's been perverted. It plays on people's desire to be nice, to be compassionate and welcoming, but it also has a form of soft prejudice attached to it, because the assumption is that if somebody is a certain gender or a certain sexuality or a certain colour or a certain religion or whatever it is, the identifying feature, that they need special treatment, they need mollycoddling basically, and they can't be you know. So it's a soft form of racism and prejudice, because you assume that all of the people of that gender have the same wants and desires, and that's obviously untrue, and again anti-Christian, because individuality is, yeah, each person has to account for themselves on Judgment Day. Sorry, you were saying?
yeah, so it's an ideology, right? Basically, wokeness is an ideology, and ideologies affect how people perceive things, right? Would you say?
Yeah, and also how they are perceived and potentially shamed and deplatformed and, you know, ridiculed.
Yeah, I meant like for someone that believes in something that that will have an impact on how they see things, right? So on the subject of persecution, for example, it influences how people perceive what is happening. So that means if we can see how being woke influences how you might perceive the world, then it would have an impact on Christian persecution, right?
For sure. Yeah, Black Lives Matter don't seem to be rushing over to Nigeria to help with the persecution of Black Christians. On the surface, Black Lives Matter is about Black Lives Mattering, and yet it seems to me it matters more if the murders or persecution are happening by white people in positions of authority, because intersectionality teaches that you can't be racist if you are the persecuted. You can't be, you just can't be. You have to be, basically, I think, the colour of the oppressor. You have to have the privilege associated with being from that group of people in order to be prejudiced and hateful and racist, which is in itself a racist statement. So yeah.
Well, it takes away. It also takes away from Christian persecution, especially if the idea is vague, right? So if you have, you know, there's only so much space in any person's mind for ideas. So if you have something that it's basically saying Black Lives Matter. Exactly what does that mean? Like, it's just like it's not coherent, right? But anyways, I'm just saying an ideology that maybe takes or competes for public attention when it comes to Christian persecution, it can actually take away from awareness of Christian persecution, especially if it becomes really popular and it's incoherent, right? Christian persecution is coherent. It is happening. I mean, all you got to do is go to thereligionofpeace.com, right? So it is happening. But what exactly is something like Black Lives Matter exactly saying? It's very localized to one country, and they really don't even, like, if you ask them what exactly does that mean, Black Lives Matter, it's an emotional argument. So it's an incoherent statement that takes away from actual persecution.
And it also purports to be in support of completely anti-Christian values for any Christians who are unaware, because my belief is that wokeness is causing Christians to convert to wokeness and out of Christianity, because Black Lives Matter, until very recently, until they deleted it, in fact, had on their stated purposes, basically they're not up for a gender recognition really in the Christian sense. The nuclear family is also looked down upon, which is bizarre really, because Black communities for years and years have been saying that they need, you know, stronger families with men present and stuff like that. Also, they are against law and
But
order.
BLM isn't saying that. BLM isn't saying so BLM is actually against nuclear families, right? So BLM is actually against what the black community says they need, but yet they say Black Lives Matter. So that's my point. It's incoherent, and it's sort of even, I don't know if that's the intention, but it's very effectively takes attention away from actual coherent persecution.
It's political messaging, just as you had the Patriot Act in the US that, you know, was a cover for decidedly unpatriotic things the government could do. They have these nice sounding words that if you just look at the surface, you know, you expect everybody to sign up for, but then when you look at what they actually stand for, you know, it's decidedly unpatriotic or whatever.
And it was
same with Black Lives Matter. Well, all lives matter. You know, so it's a pretty meaningless statement to begin with, to single out a certain race. You know, that's, I would argue, in itself racist. And they've actually redefined racism as well to be power plus prejudice. So you can't be racist unless you're in a position of power, which they say, you know, they're the disadvantage. But hey, look at all these big sports stars leading, and, you know, companies, all of them spawning their mottos and whatnot. They're part of the system. So, you know, where is this lack of power supposedly coming from?
So I would tie it back to France in this way. Samuel Paty, who was the teacher who was beheaded very recently by a Russian-born Chechen teenager, basically, although he was an adult, he was giving classes on freedom of speech. And the current state, I would say, of the mainly left-wing Western European education systems is that all cultures are completely equal, even the ones that propagate the myths of, you know, certain religions being superior to others, or certain lives being less valuable to others, when as Christians we know that God doesn't look at things like that. Like whilst we were sinners, he loved us, and that's good enough for me. So the education system has been, in my opinion, I don't know what the word is, woked up. I don't know. It's definitely right-wing people, maybe, or people who speak about things that are now taboo, even though we have free speech, are deplatformed and protested against. And oftentimes I've seen interviews with the protesters and they've no idea what the person has said that's so offensive, but they take the word of whomever it is who calls the protest. And that's the thing about big groups of people. They're not the sum of their parts in terms of intelligence, because there's a different psychology that goes on in groups. But yeah, I'm going to open it up to anybody else, I guess.
Well, that's one thing you see in group psychology, like, for example, how a mob works. It has to do with why broken windows policing is so important, because if you don't, you know, look after the small crimes, then people will be encouraged to commit larger crimes. And in mobs, you know, many of them are opportunistic, so they'll not do anything and they'll remain peaceful until there's an agitator that does do something. So, you know, what you see in the riots, for example, in Portland, you know, if those have been properly prosecuted instead of the perpetrators being let go the next day, or not even picked up to begin with, it wouldn't have escalated the way it had. You know, the large-scale riots and looting, etc., most of those who took part of it wouldn't have done so if they had to be the sheep to cross the dam first. But, you know, there's just a few who are organized, etc., that kind of like lead the way, and the rest, you know, just follows.
think there's something to be said for people who are willing. Yeah, I don't know. I just thought of Sean King. He's not actually like the head of BLM, but he's kind of a spokesperson. And if you presume that you speak for many people from different walks of life just because they agree with the concept that your organization puts forward, I'm sure not all of them have seen the like Marxism basically that's involved, or realize the anti-Christian implications because they want to seem polite. They genuinely believe in anti-racism, and therefore, you know, they just don't look past the surface. But if you presume to speak for many people, it's another form of either bullying, pressure tactics, shaming if you don't go along with the your co-religionists, as it were, or it's just presumption and you don't actually speak for them, and then they have to catch up with each new proclamation of who is to be, you know, outed and who is to be put up on a pedestal. And I don't like that, because I'd rather look to the Bible and to Christ for who to love, and he's already told me everyone. So it's like pretty conclusive to me. It's pretty cut and dry.
Everyone doesn't include divisions by creed or color or origin at all. It's just like you're commanded to love all your neighbors. And so, you know, that the whole idea of racism is pretty ludicrous when you look at the Bible. And, you know, but if you look at the Quran, for example, there's Muhammad was pretty light-skinned, let's put it that way, and he didn't like being called dark, and he says that black people, you know, are of the devil and all these things. So, you know, if you want to look at a xenophobic religion, you know, look toward Islam.
There's over 100 verses in the Quran that speak of jihad or retribution or retaliation, or, you know, there's retaliation is prescribed for you in the matter of the slain. There is life for you in the law of retaliation. Men of understanding, that you may guard yourselves, fight in the way of Allah with those who fight with you, and kill them wherever you find them, and drive them out from whence they drove you out. And persecution is severer than slaughter. And do not fight with them at the sacred mosque until they fight with you in it. But if they do fight you, then slay them. Such is the recompense of the unbelievers. So that's like four, like separate, well, two consecutive sets of ayah, and there's over 100 of them. Whereas I'll get on later to some Bible verses that.
Yeah, there's also that surah that says that if you you shouldn't insult other gods because they might insult Allah in turn, their adherents. And, you know, Allah was kind of a bit, well, not really sure of himself, maybe.
A little insecure, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Considering he is the only God, he says, I'm not sure which other gods shouldn't be mocked or insulted. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into it.
But it's kind of interesting that when there's, you know, a pretty clear commandment to leave others well enough alone because they might insult Allah, and yet, you know, it's mockery after mockery after mockery. Not that you know, particularly concerns me, because I'm strong enough in my faith, and, you know, God doesn't really need any defense. He's pretty well capable. So, but it's kind of, I loathe hypocrisy, let's put it that way.
I've got one more, and then I'll like let the other two guys have a word. But the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his apostle and strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, or their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. And just quickly, because there's pretty like desperate situations going on, I'm just going to read you one Bible verse to show you like a hopefully a better way. So 2 Corinthians 8, it says, we are hard pressed on all sides but not crushed, perplexed but not in despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. So it's like a message of the persecution had already started by then, but yeah, it's speaking of their enduring nature and God's favour on them. So I'll leave it at that for the minute. if anyone wants to jump in.
Well, you said something earlier about this tendency to equate all the cultures, to everyone to coexist, everyone to be inclusive, to basically to flatten every difference, to just be one huge people that are all the same. That it doesn't matter really if your ideological diversity, we will ignore that, and you're just gonna be. You need to become what we want you to become, right? You have to conform to this new society that we want to build. This is wokeness, basically, and in doing this, you have to censor certain things. And the irony is that Macron he said he aims to have a secular France, to have a completely separated, non-religious country. And by doing so, so this is his latest response to the attack on the teacher, the beheading of the teacher. So what he's doing is actually doing the same thing that you said earlier, right? He's equating all religions all as equally bad. But if you think about it, atheism and a policy that has not, the left in America, basically, the left in America and Muslims are they're friends. They agree with each other very well. Atheism does not stop this very subtle and progressive, not as in a revolution, but how is it called in English? Progresses slowly. Is that word, progressive? It's advancing rather in society, in Europe especially. And this is the censorship. I think the Islamophobe word, this is where it comes in play, because the families of this, the students of this teacher, the families complained to the teacher. Well, he was already dead, but they complained about the teacher that he showed the cartoons in the first place. Okay, so the woke culture will say, yeah, you're right, you shouldn't do that because these are minorities, these are oppressed, and we're friends with them. We're trying to build this new order that you need to conform to, so those are forbidden. This is also incompatible with not only Islam, but you see they're friends with each other, right? You can't insult Islam, and this doesn't come from an Islamic source. It comes from what Macron said to be a secular source. How is that possible? Because deep down they are very similar. They're very similar because it is unexplainable how this mutual support, let's say, unless they have a common goal, how this can take place.
Common enemy.
Yeah, or the common enemy. But in this case, I guess for Islam, religiously speaking, the infidel is the enemy. Everything that isn't the Islamic State, everything that isn't the Ummah, everything that isn't us, is bad, is morally bad. Okay, we are justified by any means to take them down. And this is the same religion that is forming with this social justice movements. Everything that isn't, you cannot take a stance, basically. If you don't take a stance, you're automatically against us. And if you want to agree with us, you have actually to become like us. You can't say that all this social awareness that is pushing, all these public manifestations and gatherings that are aiming to display this, display our grief to this United States, or mostly United States, but in other parts of the world as well, to display towards this grief towards this institution that actually has done good to us, but we're not happy. We need to display this grief publicly, we need to have this ritual so that people can see, and if you want to agree with us, you have to agree with our premises, you have to agree with our ideology. You can't support us, you can't, if you ignore us, you automatically don't care, and since they are a proactive force, you're going to clash with them at a certain point. It's not something you can ignore.
I think also with postmodernist ideology and remaking of society, because I think that the woke attitude to society is that it's so inherently bad at the moment that it can't possibly be reformed successfully. So it has to be torn down and remade in somebody's image, not God's. But yeah, it has to be, the institutions need to be infiltrated and, taken over, rebuilt, redistributed, and stuff like that. So the church obviously is one of the oldest institutions. Also, economic policy is different. Law and punishment is different. But education is for certain, it's different because you're teaching a set of values that are not based on the Bible, because the Bible is the authority and the establishment that is seeking to be torn down. And I think the coalition or the correlation between atheism and Islam is possibly, atheism is taught as the truth, basically, in state-funded schools, at least in Britain. Belief in God is not taught as a fact, it's taught as a belief system, whereas science is taught as fact, and Islam teaches its tenets as fact in, madrasas and stuff like that. So they're both absolutist and they're both authoritative in their own fields, and thereby they can, have a common goal, like you say, and work towards it, pretty successfully.
Well, I would say that science started out as a way to better understand God's creation and is not expressly incompatible with religion at all. So make that note that we're not saying that science is a bad thing. Just don't start with the conclusion and then try to find the answers. Like, be a proper scientist. If you say that there is no God, I'm not going to find evidence for it, then yeah, you're starting from the wrong conclusion. Like, at least be honest to say you don't know.
That's it. Science is, after all, only a theory. It has to be replicable. It has to be repeatable. It has to be observable. And it has to be able to be performed by other scientists to verify or peer review. Whereas God's word, in the Bible at least, is absolute. He says it, and that's it. Like, you can pore over it theologically, you can do apologetics and polemics, but it's still what he said, kind of thing, as opposed to something that's built on just theories. And they're seeking to disprove their own theories oftentimes, because that's the thing of science. It seeks to better its knowledge, whereas God states that his knowledge is perfect anyway. We have to better understand his will, but he doesn't have to change anything that he said at all. So, yeah, has anyone got anything else to say on wokeness? Or
yeah, I'd like to actually add one thing. So I wanted to comment on how wokeness can actually be used as a counter argument against free speech. So, for example, the Paris incident, the murder in Paris. Mm-hmm. So for example, like I googled Paris beheading, okay, and I found 3 articles, and I just want to use this as an example just to show something interesting, right? So one article, this one is this is the New York Times. So basically it says, apparently the person who killed the teacher had an accomplice. Basically 2 people identified the teacher to the person who ended up basically killing the teacher and taking off his head. So another article, so one article basically says, from the New York Times, it says, France waging a crackdown honors a teacher and depicts a plot in beheading, right? And here's another one. So NBC, here's the title from NBC. France has long embraced secularism. After beheading, will it be used to oppress? Question mark. So I thought this was really interesting because this article, okay, just I'm going to summarize it. This article says by making, by raising an issue of like this issue risks basically like okay I'll just read it. So it says quote, the new laïcité, right? It says has become a tool to target people we consider the enemies of our culture. That's the quote. So this article for NBC is basically saying that if we make an issue of this, we risk offending and possibly oppressing other people that are in this culture. And then, so the point is, by this rhetoric actually puts talking about incidents like this in a light where are we sure we want to condemn this? Are we sure we want to be too strong on this because we can offend people? So for being woke could actually result in people suppressing themselves, right? And if people don't talk about this, then that's like providing moral arguments for crimes like this. So you have the fact that it was a murder, it was premeditated, and he had an accomplice, and it was political. So this was a terrorist incident, and you have outlets who basically they produce rhetoric that muddies the waters and turns this clear case of premeditated political violence, and it says, guys, do we want to make too much of an issue about this because we can offend people? So my point is, wokeness is used. It's not just like it's something that's definitely out there. It is used as an argument against free speech. It's not the only argument, but woke rhetoric is used to kind of put some pressure on free speech. And
I've
yeah, just wanted to say
I
that.
saw a tweet from somebody, someone pretty well known, I guess. I can't remember who now. And they were basically calling out the French police for shooting the assailant dead, who just severed someone's head with a 30-centimeter kitchen knife. They were saying it was excessive force, and yeah, as far as I'm aware, the reports I've read say that he failed to surrender his arms when he was requested, I guess, pretty forcefully by the French police. He's already, put a picture of a severed head on Instagram or Snapchat or whichever social media it was. But he was clearly determined to do what he did. And one of the most telling comments that I heard was from one of his family members, and it was a guy, I think his father or his uncle, who said if we'd known he was into religion, basically we would have kept a better eye on him. And that's very telling, because the guy didn't say if we'd known he was an extremist. He just said if we'd have known he was into religion. So that pretty much summarizes what the guy thinks of religion, at least, or the outward manifestation of it. But yeah, it's pretty reminiscent, I think, the persecution under communism of the church and of Christians especially, and just the North Korea is the #1 spot for years and years, along with China, normally up there for the persecution of Christians and Muslims. Any theists basically are persecuted, and images of Christ are torn down and replaced with, at the moment, I guess, Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un, whoever it might be. But it's illegal in many countries to confess Christ. But communism especially has had a massive effect, I think, on the 20th century at least, and now it seems to have morphed a bit. But it's all rooted in anti-Christ and anti-Christian and anti-God in general political systems and ways of living. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about communism or Marxism or other.
Well, I wanted to go back to that family member of the perpetrator saying, if I'd known he was into religion. And I think, that's a tacit agreement that there's no such thing as moderate Islam. Moderate Islam is a lie we've all been sold. Like, it's those terrorists, they're, the crazies out there, they're the lone wolves, and they don't represent real Islam. That's just a bunch of bullshit, let's be honest. Because if you look at,
Use your language.
yeah, but if you look at polls, for example, of support for terrorist acts, that even in, Western countries, like way up to 90 something percent agree that that was justified everywhere among Muslims. So, where is this moderate Muslim that we've heard so much about?
That's a good point. Yeah. So I guess different. Sorry, I'm just looking at a notification on my screen. Yeah, different ideologies of sort from the time of the beginning of the church to destroy her, to take away the power of the church, to deny Christ, to I've just got to give you a Bible verse. There's quite a few. I'm not going to read them all out, but some of them are pretty useful, I guess, for the purposes of the stream. Just in contrast to the Quranic and Marxist literature that speaks of the Christian God. So this is but and if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are you, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. And that's 1 Peter 3:14. So it's foretold anyway, the persecution of Christians. I think it's pretty much spilled out now that Western societies are seen as Christian, like by non-European or like Eastern countries, basically. And this is one that I really do like. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? And that's rhetorical because the answer is no, nothing will. So again, I'm going to shut up and let someone else speak. Or just carry on talking. Okay, so my opinion is that liberalism, and like classical liberalism, for anybody, it's for sure like a left-wing political system, but it seeks, in my experience, classical liberals are very fair-minded. They're kind of libertarian, I guess, nowadays. It's morphed, but liberalism as it seeks to be now, progressivism, is encroaching certainly on the church and on Christians in general. And, for example, Christians in Canada are now compelled to lie, basically, to call someone by a preferred pronoun, even if the person themselves identifies that they change their pronoun every other day because they're like fluid in some way. And you can now get a criminal record for that kind of thing. Street preaching and Christianity there, I've seen recently, quite a well-known preacher has been physically attacked, and yet he has a warrant out for him and the attacker, because they were injured, hobbles free because they broke their leg. So the Bible does speak of a time when up will be down and good will be bad and stuff like that, or described as such. And I pretty much think that that's coming to pass. The 60s and the 70s, and then the differences in the education system when we moved away from like mainly church schools basically and went to state-funded schools, and the state doesn't advocate Christianity because of the separation of church and state, which is absolutely fine. But I don't know that anyone envisioned it would go as far as promoting alternative lifestyles as something to be kind of revered, rather than just as part of a PSE lesson, just to know who you may have a conversation with one day. And marriage is denigrated, and families are, parents are certainly dishonoured and stuff. Yeah. So anybody, I mean, we can wrap up pretty soon. I've if anyone wants to ask any questions, I can't see the live chat at the moment, but I'm sure they'll be asked.
Well, on the subject of wokeism and families, I think we could bring up Planned Parenthood and how it was founded by, a genocidal maniac who wanted to destroy all black people, and how their clinics are primarily present in heavily black areas. And I think they've, gruesome as their mission statement is to begin with, because all destruction of life is, a problem.
So I think her name was Margaret Sanger.
Margaret Sanger.
She was a eugenicist, an open racist and eugenicist, but in those days, being openly racist was kind of socially acceptable. But yes, she spoke in her, in records that are still held today. She spoke of her desire to lessen the black population, basically, and to this day, they perform more than 250,000 abortions on black babies every year. Again, BLM doesn't seem to be outside protesting those clinics because pro-choice agendas and other basically anti-Christian worldview. So they've got a lot of conflicting small-scale ideologies within the umbrella of wokeness, and therefore even in well-defined organizations, there will come times when two different minorities or persecuted groups who are supposed to be equally important can't work, and the selling of baby parts is particularly gruesome, and making money on people's pain, basically. So
exactly. And speaking of conflicting messaging, hello, Bobex. Speaking of conflicting messaging, when you see politicians and sports stars kneel for, one particular group of people, when you should only ever kneel when you propose to your girlfriend or for your sovereign or for God, I find that a bit interesting because they're nominally Christians.
Well, it's a form of worship, isn't it? So I would submit that wokeness is a cult. It has semi-sacred literature. It has iconography. It has say their name, because I don't know, words are very powerful. It has certain characteristics of reprogramming and cult mentality and apostasy as well. If people are cancelled or thrown out of the group or shamed publicly, or all of these things, they can pretty quickly find themselves without the support network that they had, even if they are part of one of the minorities that are we're told can't be racist or anything like that. So I think that someone has a question who's in the voice. So yes, please.
So okay, since we're talking about the umbrella of wokeness, right? My question to the panel is this, right? What does the umbrella of wokeness stand for, or what does it at the end lead to? Because in my mind, if I, for example, examine all of the ideas that the woke people, in quotation marks, have, it paints to me a picture of Babylon, because they promote all of the things that happened in Babylon, and we all know what God thinks about it. So what do you guys think?
Okay, I'll let someone else answer that first, or I'll go.
Well, they are trying to build one world government, one, massive shade of beige. Everyone is the same, and they're working towards one common thing. So that does evoke the image of Babylon, with, the logical outcome that God says, well, I see what you're doing, and I don't like it one bit.
Well, to equate it with Babylon, right? The people of in the story of Babylon, there's first of all, the circumstances are different, right? Now there's all sort of different problems. the iniquity, so to say, is something that persists today even. But I think it is oversimplifying it, right? To equate it with, because in Babylon, in the Bible is described in the Bible like a prostitute, basically, right? Everything that she does is filth. In Revelation, there's this imagery. She's drunk on the blood of the martyrs, the people that are Christian, basically. And so the simplification stands in the fact that today there's a whole heritage that is this cultural Marxism that is such a, at the core, the driving force of it is simple, but the nuances of how it manifests and the way it propagates is, in my opinion, too complex to simply dumb it down to a instinct of a population. It's more than that. There's something else at work. It's not just suppression of the boundaries of your, no self-control, and just handed over to passions or to lawlessness. It is also that, but what stands behind it, in my opinion, is much more complex.
I think that if you look at the tenets or the literature of wokeness or Das Kapital or Marx, him, like any of those godless cults or political ideologies, it's very difficult to find even maybe 2 or 3 that are compatible with Christianity in terms of how they view the family, how they view working, how they view the rights of individuals as opposed to the government, what we look for in leaders, how Judeo-Christian like societies have developed over time. Because for sure, in Islam's defense, it's younger than Christianity, and maybe 600 years ago Christianity was not as tolerant or out of sync with the rest of society, as it were. We had our own issues with the church and stuff like that, but it's always sought to, I believe the church, as in the body of Christ, is the right way. Obviously I wouldn't be arguing for it if I didn't. I don't believe that the sins that are being committed at the moment, and they are sins whether people are believers or not, can go unnoticed or unpunished by God. And I think that's there's a lot of end time prophecies that are for sure not happening now, as it were, because there are certain time requisites. But Martin Luther speaks of God being able to mete out justice through the ungodless. In terms of Islam, he was talking about all those years, like 500 years ago, but also I guess in terms of atheistic and just godless societies. So for sure God is in control of all of it, and he blesses those who are persecuted for him. But he can certainly use these ideologies to, Christians have got a set of values and responsibilities and rights that we need to maintain and practice. So prayer and repentance and, I don't know, feeding the poor and just like fellowship and general, ministering to the needy and making disciples and lots of other manifestations of the Holy Spirit need to be done. If you're going to confess with your mouth, I hope you believe in your heart, because otherwise they're just empty words, and God doesn't appreciate lying. And the other thing I would say is, because of the incompatibility of secular, really, society, because liberalism has become progressivism, and that's like extolling the virtues of people just because of who they want to sleep with, nothing to do with the person, just because of their skin color, which is still not the choice of the person. So innate characteristics, which I don't believe homosexuality to be, but that's another stream, innate characteristics shouldn't be legislated or extolled or denigrated. So racism or anti-racism, like it doesn't matter if you're trying to help people because historically they've been oppressed. If you treat them without checking if they are oppressed, without checking if they've suffered as a result, then you are being also racist. And if you believe, you know, that all white people or all black people or all whomever else, that's a form of racism. There's nothing wrong with in-group preferencing, but prejudice, like prejudging someone, so, you know, based solely on their appearance, whilst it's a natural instinct, if it's followed through logically to its conclusion, it becomes pretty hateful. And God sees into our hearts, so he just doesn't care what colour we are. And I'm kind of babbling. But yeah, it can be a test. God can certainly test us in our adversities and struggles, and Satan can also use good things to lead us straight to hell. He can allow us to be chaste and pretty outwardly decent people because of our pride or arrogance or racism, yeah, because we don't view other people as good as other people. But the converse of that is not to hold everybody is equal in societal terms, because all societies are not equal, because some of them say that Jesus isn't God. And for me, you know, it's not for me to mete out justice, but they'll get their they'll be judged individually. And the, you know, poor children who grow up in those societies don't have a chance to question the existence of God or hopefully come to him if they're meant to. So I kind of think it's maybe time for closing statements, if anybody has any, or if there's any questions. Yeah.
No
Well,
questions from my side. Just real quick, just my closing statement. I'd say, so a suggestion: everyone who's somehow attracted by this to this culture, or to this religion, to this state of victimhood, which is very attractive. You know, it's actually addictive to be a victim. You can't keep being a victim, and you know, the silence is what brings this to what offers the possibility of these atrocities to take place. The constant political correctness that refuses to identify the enemy, refuses to identify Islam. Even Macron said that their fight is not against the Muslims of France who want to pray and go to the mosque every day. Their fight is, his words, is against the Salafi, basically the Salafi who want to return to the core Islam, to the pure Islam. That's what he says he's fighting. So he has already identified the enemy, except he doesn't know it. And if you are a Muslim, if you are offended by these things, a very practical advice is just toughen up, because Muslim or not Muslim, it's you know, just this is immoral. Simply, it's not where you come from, where good and bad is defined by your belonging to your Islamic state. Morality is not defined by that. And you know, the Western has another heritage. It has a Judeo-Christian heritage, and they just can't coexist like this. And this is something that I've said at the beginning. They are incompatible, and I repeat it now. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, it's if I may add to that, and also this will be my closing. It's a question of actually building cultural bridges. So not taking offense to someone else's opinion or speech is really, it's like it's the responsibility in order to actually assimilate into the countries that Muslims find themselves in. And it's not just a problem for Muslims, it's really a problem. It's not a problem, but it's something, it's a responsibility every person has to deal with, because it's the cost of free speech, right? So you have free speech, that's why you came to Western countries, right, for free speech, for freedom, right? So it doesn't make sense then to take offense from speech, because to do so is to be like a political, you could say, agent in those struggles between freedoms, like in those conflicts, or those, you could say, contests where free speech is on the line. A so-called moderate Muslim who takes offense to someone else's free speech actually becomes politically, they become a pawn, right? So it's just something that people have to, like, nobody really, especially Muslims, like, people don't, they probably took it for granted. Oh, if we go to a non-Muslim country, what does that mean? Well, this is what it means. It means you have to have thicker skin. If you don't, then you bring all the problems from wherever you came from, you bring it with you, and you become a proxy for those problems. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, so one last thing then. Like, you see all these efforts at interfaith dialogue, and well, I think the outcome writes itself when you have one particular group that wants to establish a caliphate that spans the world. Like, how can you negotiate peace with an ideology that wants to conquer you? You know, there's no such thing possible. So it's like all show, but that's not the only failing of the Vatican, regrettably. So it's not as if, you know, Christians are without blame in this either. Like, the Vatican has been heavily infiltrated by the woke as well.
I would say, in closing, that Christ was given all authority on earth and in heaven. I think that Christians are sometimes guilty of forgetting that he told us that we are in him as he is in the Father. Like, all authority means we don't need to control other people. We know that God alone knows the hearts and minds of men. We don't seek to censor or control or manipulate people or shame them into agreeing, because outward displays of agreement are absolutely useless, because in your heart you can be saying the exact opposite and just act like, you know, people can be bullied into, with peer pressure, into conforming, whereas we're told that the Holy Spirit conforms us. And I would say that the truth is always hated, that religions that grow up like on quicksand, as it were, with insecurities are going to be more prone to try and silence critics, because that's what the insecure do, basically. Whereas if you stand on the truth, it doesn't become less true because it's insulted or hated, and that's very handy for the church. Yeah, I guess that, to me, the idea of group responsibility and collective responsibility and collectivism doesn't really fit in with Christianity. Obviously, you know, all people are sinful, so that's a massive group, but it's your individual responsibility. You can't save anybody else, in terms of you can't speak for them on Judgment Day. You can't convert them. You can argue, for sure. You can, you know, the Bible commands us to. You can show them the gospel. You can make lots of clever arguments, but you can't see into their heart to see if they really do accept God's sacrifice for them. And in that, you know, we must also lead by example, because we have the truth and we can't allow it to be censored. Because as soon as bad ideas or bad words, even, you know, and that's arbitrary because from decade to decade it changes, if we allow them to be censored, even words we wouldn't wish to hear in polite conversation, the next thing, it's progressive, and then the truth is censored. And that can't be allowed to happen, because God has already called people to him that we need to be able to reach and to preach to. So, on that bombshell, I don't think there are any questions. If there were, I apologise. We will be back soon with a different topic. and I might not be using my phone at that time. I may have charged a computer or 3 in preparation rather than just chatting. But yeah, I'll hopefully add some links into the description box for articles that may be of use. And yeah, for Christians, please pray for those who are persecuted, and please pray also, more importantly, potentially, for the persecutors, because they're under a strong delusion, and they certainly need the scales removed from their eyes, ideologically speaking. So God bless you. Please subscribe and share and like and comment and all of the good stuff. Click the Discord link. There's Parler, that just reams of stuff. Just click everything, basically. We're trustworthy. And yeah, when someone presses the button, this will stop streaming. And God bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.